My boyfriend's abusive mother planned his graduation trip but refused to let us room together, then called me ungrateful when I said I wouldn't go. My boyfriend James and I have been together since our sophomore year of college, and we've built what I thought was a solid relationship based on trust and mutual support. We're both 23 now, living just 5 minutes from his mother Patricia's house, though you'd never know it from how rarely they see each other. James has been open with me about his childhood, about the abuse he endured, about how his entire family maintains minimal contact with Patricia by her own choice. Understanding this background, I've always tried to be supportive when it comes to his complicated family dynamics. When Patricia announced she wanted to plan a graduation trip for James, my first reaction was cautious optimism. Maybe this was her attempt at reconciliation, a way to celebrate her son's accomplishment and show she cared. James seemed uncertain about it, but also hopeful in that way. Adult children of difficult parents often are, always looking for signs that things might finally change. Patricia told him he could invite me if he wanted, but I'd need to pay my own way while she covered his expenses. That seemed fair enough to me. I have a part-time job and some savings, and I wanted to be there to celebrate James finishing his degree. Then the details started emerging, and my optimism quickly evaporated. Patricia had planned a trip to an all-inclusive resort in another country, and the guest list included her boyfriend Marcus, his 2 children aged 10 and 14, James's 14-year-old sister Lily, and obviously, James himself. What immediately struck me as strange was that James had absolutely no input on any aspect of this trip. He didn't get to choose the destination, didn't know which resort we'd be staying at, and wasn't consulted on the dates. For a trip supposedly celebrating his graduation, he seemed more like an afterthought than the guest of honor. But the real issue came when Patricia laid out the sleeping arrangements. She informed James that under no circumstances would we be allowed to room together. Instead, I would be sharing a room with his teenage sister Lily and Marcus's 10-year-old daughter Emma. James would be rooming with Marcus's 14-year-old son Tyler. When James asked why, Patricia's reasoning was frustratingly vague and inconsistent. We weren't married, she said, though she and Marcus weren't married either, and would presumably be sharing a room. We were too young, apparently, despite both being 23 and having lived together before. I sat in James's apartment after he told me all this, trying to process what I was hearing. So let me get this straight, I said slowly. This trip is supposed to celebrate your graduation, but you had no say in where we're going, when we're going, or who's coming. And now she's telling us we can't even room together, but expects me to share a room with 2 kids I barely know? James rubbed his face tiredly, a gesture I'd come to recognize as his response to dealing with his mother. I know it sounds bad when you put it like that, he admitted, but it's a free trip to a country I've never been to. Maybe we can just go along with it for a week? The more I thought about the arrangement, the more it felt less like a vacation and more like free childcare. I voiced this concern to James, and I could see the recognition in his eyes. He'd been thinking the same thing but hadn't wanted to say it out loud. I'm scared my mom is just going to force me to babysit the kids the whole time, he confessed. You know how she is. She'll want time alone with Marcus, and suddenly we'll be responsible for 3 children in a foreign country. That fear resonated deeply with me. I imagined being stuck in a hotel room with 2 kids, expected to supervise them, entertain them, keep them safe. What if something happened? What if one of them got hurt or wandered off while technically under my supervision? I barely knew these children. Emma, I'd met maybe twice, and Tyler once at a brief family gathering. The thought of being held responsible for their safety in an unfamiliar country made my anxiety spike. What if I just book my own room? I suggested. I can pay for it myself. That way we can have our own space, and there's no confusion about childcare responsibilities. James looked uncomfortable. I can bring that up to her, but I really don't think she'll go for it. She's pretty set on these arrangements. The fact that he was already predicting his mother's refusal before even asking told me everything I needed to know about the power dynamic in their relationship. Over the next few days, I wrestled with my decision. Part of me wanted to be there for James, to celebrate this milestone with him. We'd supported each other through 4 years of college, late-night study sessions, stress over exams and papers. His graduation was important, and I wanted to be part of that moment. But another part of me, the part that was growing louder, recognized that this trip wasn't really about celebrating James at all. It was about Patricia maintaining control, about putting us in positions where we'd be useful to her, while keeping us separated and off balance. I finally told James my decision. I'm not comfortable going unless we can room together. I don't want to share a room with kids I don't know in a foreign country, and I don't want to spend what little money I have to essentially babysit on my vacation. James's face fell. But I really want you there, he said, his voice taking on a pleading quality that made my heart ache. This is supposed to be something we experience together. Can't you just deal with it for a week? It's just sleeping arrangements. It's not just sleeping arrangements, James, I said, trying to keep my frustration in check. It's about respect. It's about your mother treating us like children she can control instead of adults making our own decisions. We're 23 years old. We've lived together. But somehow on this trip, we need to be chaperoned and separated? He had no good answer for that, because there wasn't one. The rules were arbitrary and designed to assert Patricia's authority, nothing more. The conversation ended badly, with both of us frustrated and hurt. James felt like I was being difficult and refusing to compromise. I felt like he was asking me to accept disrespect, and uncomfortable conditions just to keep his mother happy. We'd reached an impasse, and I could feel the weight of it settling between us like a physical barrier. 2 days after I made my initial post seeking advice, everything exploded into our worst fight ever. James came to my apartment in the evening, his jaw set in that stubborn way that told me this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. "I need to talk to you about this trip situation," he started, and I nodded, bracing myself. "I feel like you're trying to convince me not to go, and that's not fair. This is a free trip to a country I've never been to. Why are you making this so difficult?" I was stunned by the accusation. "I've never once told you not to go," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I said I wasn't comfortable going under your mother's conditions. That's about me and my boundaries, not about controlling what you do." But James was worked up now. Months, or maybe years of frustration with his mother's control finally bubbling over, unfortunately directed at me instead of her. He'd finally gotten the reasons directly from Patricia about why we couldn't room together, and hearing them out loud made them sound even more ridiculous. We weren't married, though she and Marcus weren't either. We were too young, though we were both legal adults who'd been living independently. And the classic parenting non-answer, "because I said so." I actually laughed when he told me that last one, a sharp, bitter sound that made James flinch. "She's treating us like we're 16, James. Do you not see how ridiculous this is?" But there was more, information that made the whole situation even more complicated. That night, James finally admitted that his mother had taken out student loans in her name to help pay for his education. They were her legal responsibility, but James felt morally obligated to ensure they got paid. Patricia had also been helping him with grocery money since he only worked part-time while finishing school. She was holding all of this over his head, and he knew it, and he was letting her do it anyway. "So, that's what this is really about," I said quietly, the pieces finally clicking into place. "She's got you trapped financially, and she's using it to control every aspect of your life, including this trip." James looked miserable but didn't deny it. "After I graduate, things will be different," he insisted. "I'll get a full-time job, I'll pay her back or take over the loans, and then she won't have this power anymore. I just need you to be patient a little longer." I'd heard promises like this before from James, vague assurances that things would change after graduation, or once he got a better job, or when we moved further away. But the timeline kept shifting, and his mother's influence never actually decreased. I wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that he'd eventually establish boundaries with Patricia, but sitting there listening to him make excuses for her control, I felt my faith wavering. James had asked his mother directly if he'd be expected to babysit on this trip, a question that should have been simple to answer. Her response came the next morning at 8 a.m. "Stop being so negative. Good night." James showed me the text, and I could see the frustration on his face. "She's so childish and immature," he muttered, scrolling through their message thread. "I can't deal with this anymore." But the truth I wasn't ready to fully acknowledge yet was that I couldn't deal with it either. I didn't want to spend my life battling James's mother, always having to navigate her moods and manipulations, always being the bad guy for wanting basic respect and boundaries. James promised me that I wouldn't have to, that things would change after graduation. But graduation was happening in a couple of months, and the trip was scheduled for shortly after that, and nothing about his mother's behavior suggested she was planning to suddenly become reasonable. Part of me wanted to go on the trip anyway, just to see what would happen, to test whether James would actually stand up for me when push came to shove, or if he'd fold under his mother's pressure like he always had before. It felt like a relationship test, a way to know definitively if this was something I could live with long term. If he couldn't defend me on this trip, in these circumstances, then what hope did we have for the future? I suggested booking my own room reservation as a compromise, thinking that if I was paying for my own space, Patricia couldn't really complain. James agreed to mention it to his mother, though his lack of enthusiasm told me he didn't expect it to go well. When he brought it up, Patricia's response was predictable. He was blowing things out of proportion, making a big deal out of nothing, being ungrateful for the generous trip she was planning. They were supposed to have a serious talk about everything that night, and James was angry in a way I rarely saw him. Maybe this would finally be the moment he set boundaries, I thought. Maybe he'd tell his mother that if she wanted us on this trip, she needed to respect us as adults. I tried to be hopeful, but years of watching him cave to Patricia's demands had taught me not to get my hopes up too high. The next day, I looked up the resort Patricia had finally disclosed to James. What I found confirmed all my worst suspicions. The resort offered a special package where one child and one teen could stay free, but only if an adult was accompanying them in the room. The math was suddenly crystal clear. Patricia had booked me into a room with the two youngest kids not because of some moral stance about unmarried couples, but because it was the most economical arrangement for her. I was literally being used as a placeholder adult to qualify for free kids accommodations. When I told James what I'd discovered, I expected him to be angry on my behalf, to see this as the final proof that his mother was manipulating the situation. Instead, he looked tired and defeated. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "She's already made the arrangements. If I fight her on this, she'll just cancel the whole thing or uninvite you or make everyone miserable. Is it really worth all this drama for sleeping arrangements?" That question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. Was it worth it? Was I being unreasonable? Was I making too big a deal out of something relatively minor? I could feel James wanting me to say no, to just go along with things to keep the peace. but something in me rebelled against that pressure. This wasn't really about sleeping arrangements or vacation logistics. This was about whether I was willing to accept being treated as less than, as a convenience rather than a partner, just to avoid conflict with James's mother. The conversation that night was supposed to resolve everything, to figure out a path forward that everyone could live with. Instead, it became the moment when I realized just how unwelcome I actually was. James called me after talking to his mother, and I could hear the tension in his voice before he even started speaking. "So I talked to my mom," he began, and my stomach knotted with anticipation. What came next was worse than I'd imagined. According to James, Patricia had called me ungrateful, a brat trying to make everything about myself. She said I was making up excuses to manipulate the situation, that I was being difficult on purpose to ruin James's graduation celebration. The words felt like physical blows, each accusation another confirmation that Patricia saw me not as her son's partner, but as an obstacle to be managed or removed. "What did you say when she said all that?" I asked James, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause, a telling silence that stretched too long. "I told her that wasn't fair," he finally said, but his tone lacked conviction. I pushed him for details, needing to know if he'd actually defended me or just offered token protests before backing down. The truth, when it emerged, was that he'd mostly listened to his mother's tirade and then tried to de-escalate by suggesting various compromises, none of which involved actually standing up to her accusations about me. Then came the real bombshell. When I asked about booking my own room reservation like we'd discussed, James dropped his voice. She already booked everything. 4 adults, 3 kids, non-refundable reservations. I felt my blood pressure rising as the implications sank in. "When did she book this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer was going to make me angry. James confirmed that Patricia had made the reservations last week, right after he'd invited me, but before I'd given a definite answer. She'd known I was uncertain because my family member was in the hospital, that I'd asked for a few days to figure things out, and she'd booked the rooms anyway, locking in arrangements that left me with only 2 options: accept her terms completely or don't go at all. It was a power play, pure and simple, designed to remove any possibility of compromise or negotiation. "So basically, she trapped me," I said flatly. "She made it so I can't book my own room without her losing money on the non-refundable reservation, which she'll hold against me. And if I don't come, she gets what she wants anyway, which is me out of the picture." James didn't deny it, because he couldn't. The manipulation was too obvious, too deliberate to pretend it was anything else. What broke my heart wasn't just Patricia's behavior, which was predictable at this point. It was what James said next. "I love you so much," he started, and I braced myself for the but I knew was coming. "I'm done with my mom. I want to go no contact when we move. After I graduate, things will change, I promise." These were words I'd heard before, promises that felt increasingly hollow with each repetition. "Okay," I said slowly, trying to understand. "So what are you going to do about this trip?" His answer confirmed my worst fears. "I'm still going. It's a free trip to a country I've never been to. I have to go along with what she says right now, because she's helping me financially." And there it was, the truth laid bare. When forced to choose between standing up to his mother and getting a free vacation, James chose the vacation. I asked him point blank if I was uninvited. "No," he said quickly. "You can come if you want. You just have to accept the room arrangements she's made," which was the same as being uninvited, really, since he knew I wasn't going to agree to those terms. When I pressed about booking my own room, he said he didn't want me spending that money if it wasn't worth it, and that it would cause tension with his mother, who'd already paid for the non-refundable group booking. So it was exactly as I'd thought, Patricia's way or the highway. James even mentioned he might invite a friend to go instead, which stung more than I wanted to admit. My place at his graduation celebration was apparently interchangeable with anybody who'd be willing to share a room with a teenage boy and wouldn't complain about the arrangements. That night, James said something that made me realize how differently we were seeing this entire situation. "I feel like there's no winning with you unless I don't go on the trip at all," he said, sounding frustrated and exhausted. He genuinely seemed to think I was being unreasonable, that I was the one creating problems. He couldn't or wouldn't see that the real issue wasn't my boundaries, but his mother's refusal to respect them and his own inability to support me against her attacks. I felt betrayed. After everything Patricia had said about me, all the names she'd called me and accusations she'd made, James was still planning to go on her trip, to accept her money, to let her dictate the terms of his life. I knew I should probably be more understanding of his complicated financial situation, of the very real power she held over him through those student loans. But understanding the reasons for someone's choices doesn't always make those choices hurt less. The next morning brought a new development that somehow made everything worse. Patricia had officially threatened to cut all financial support. The student loans, the grocery money, everything she'd been using to maintain her control was now explicitly on the line. James told me he'd reached a breaking point, that he'd rather lose her support than continue dealing with this manipulation. I wanted so badly to believe him, to trust that he was finally ready to set real boundaries. But even as he said these things, I knew the timing was suspicious. Patricia was threatening to cut him off specifically because she was angry at me, because I'd refused to fall in line with her demands. This wasn't really about James finally standing up for himself. This was about his mother punishing both of us for my defiance and making sure James knew exactly whose fault it was when the financial support disappeared. I haven't slept in over 24 hours as I write this, my mind circling endlessly around the same questions. Am I being reasonable? unreasonable or demanding? Should I be more understanding of James's position? Or is my hurt justified? Is this relationship worth fighting for? Or am I just delaying the inevitable by staying with someone who can't seem to prioritize me over his mother's demands? The answers should be clear, but love makes everything complicated. James is kind and supportive in so many ways. He's been there for me through difficult times, celebrated my successes, made me laugh when I was stressed. But increasingly, I'm realizing that all those good qualities don't matter if he can't do the one thing that really counts: choose to build a life with me instead of continuing to revolve around his mother's orbit. I keep thinking about what our future would look like. Every holiday would be a negotiation. Every major life decision would somehow involve Patricia's input or approval. If we got engaged, would she throw a fit about not being consulted on the proposal? If we got married, would she try to control our wedding? And if we ever had children, would I spend years fighting her for the right to parent my own kids without her interference? The trip is just the latest battle in what I'm starting to realize would be an endless war. James promises things will change after graduation, but graduation is happening in a couple months and the trip comes right after. If he can't establish boundaries now, at this pivotal moment when he's supposedly becoming independent, when will he ever be ready? The graduation timeline has already shifted to when we move, which will probably shift to something else when that time comes. Part of me wants to give him one more chance, to see if he really will go no contact with Patricia like he claims he wants to. But another part of me, the part that's been growing stronger with each disappointment, knows that people don't change unless they really want to. And right now, despite all his words about being done with his mother, James's actions tell a different story. He's still taking her money, still accepting her trips, still letting her insult me without real consequences. I think about the woman I want to be, the life I want to live. I've never been the type to tolerate disrespect or accept crumbs when I deserve a full meal. I've always believed I was worth more than that. But somehow, in trying to be supportive and understanding of James's complicated family situation, I found myself in a position where I'm expected to tolerate exactly those things. Expected to smile and accept whatever treatment Patricia dishes out, to be grateful for the scraps of respect thrown my way, to always be the one compromising while she never budges an inch. The really scary thing is realizing that if I stay with James without things fundamentally changing, this is my future. Years of this, decades maybe, always fighting for basic consideration, always being the bad guy for wanting to be treated like an equal partner, always hearing promises that things will change while watching them stay exactly the same. Is love supposed to feel this exhausting? Is this really what partnership looks like? Or have I been fooling myself about what James and I actually have? I don't have good answers yet. The trip is still months away, and theoretically there's time for things to change. But I'm tired of waiting for change that never comes. I'm tired of being called ungrateful for wanting respect. I'm tired of watching the man I love choose convenience and free vacations over standing up for our relationship. Most of all, I'm tired of feeling like I'm the only one fighting for us, while James just tries to keep everyone happy. Maybe tomorrow, I'll have more clarity. Maybe after some sleep, the path forward will seem obvious. But right now, sitting here in the pre-dawn darkness, I'm terrified that I already know what I need to do, and I'm just not ready to do it yet. Because admitting that this relationship might not be salvageable means admitting I've invested years in something that was never going to work. And that's a truth I'm not quite ready to face, even though it's staring me right in the face every time James chooses his mother's demands over my dignity. The question isn't really about a vacation anymore. It never was. The question is whether I love myself enough to walk away from someone who can't seem to love me more than he fears disappointing his mother. And honestly, I don't know the answer to that yet. But I'm starting to think I need to figure it out before I waste any more years waiting for James to become the partner I need him to be, instead of the partner his mother allows him to be.